Welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K., and we are back by popular demand with Paul Kalemkiarian Sr., the guy that invented this whole industry of the direct-to-consumer wine, and we dig a little deeper, we go a little further, we scratch the surface a little more to find out what he was thinking. Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. We're available on Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast hangout. And this is the show where we peel back the wine business one label, one cork, and one bottle at a time. But we're going to go back a little further today, like way back, like 1920. No, I'm kidding, Dad. We're going to go way back to the industry being a $3 billion industry, and the industry I'm talking about is the direct-to-the-consumer wine business, and it's becoming more and more important for the consumer to understand what's going on out there. And I thought we'd go back. We'd bring in Paul K. Sr. I'm here in his home office, which looks just like the home office when I was a kid.
Yes, one big mess. However, I know where everything is.
That's right, you do. I was able to put my finger right on everything. In fact, I got to your computer. I was able to find your keyboard. That was great. But you know, this industry is. We were doing it in the 70s, and we're gonna catch up to that point in a minute. And it's now critical for most wineries to have a direct-to-consumer wine club, because you get this the wine clubs of the wineries. They get to skip the 2 or 3 middlemen that's in the wine business as far as taking a little bit of the profit before it gets to the consumer. And so many wineries only survive on their wine club because they're getting full retail for the wines. And then since the beginning of the 90s, the wineries have started doing this, and then all of a sudden, toward the early 2000s, a whole bunch of wine clubs started. Some of them use algorithms to determine what your taste buds are like. Some of them are specific to varietals. Some are specific to a style of wine. But the whole thing started in 1972 at a small wine shop in Palos Verdes Estates called, what was it called then?
Palos Verdes Liquor and Spice. When I purchased the store, it was a freestanding store, very much in a upscale neighborhood. However, it was more like a truck driver beer pickup stop rather than a liquor store.
Well, it was for me because when I worked there, you know, I'm going to tell you a secret before we go back. I'm going to take you back to your younger days when you're in Cairo. But what was the guy's name that ran the store? Hank?
Oh,
we had Larry.
For Hank, and then Hank was the manager.
Okay, so Hank. Maybe I shouldn't disclose this to the listening audience, or maybe to you, but there was this trick that we used to pull. Now, I don't think I taught it to anybody, just so you know. So the only person stealing from your dad was me. So what I would do is the guy would say, you know, we've got 2 bottles of gin and a bottle of Jack Daniels and 2 mixers going out to so-and-so address. Can you make the order? And then you had the manager check the order on the way out the door.
That's right.
Now, what you didn't know is that if you took a couple of half pints of vodka and laid it flat on the bottom of the box and then put a false bottom and then put the dividers in, and then then Hank would count the bottles, and it would be 5 bottles for a 5-bottle order, but he didn't see the 2 bottles of half pints of vodka underneath.
Oh, my goodness. No wonder we were in trouble.
No wonder you were short every time.
No, short of the half pints. That half pint shelf got empty very fast.
Yeah, well, you know, that's the way it works. Is you have to be creative in this business anyway.
Wait a minute. Let me tell you a story about half pints, though. In his retirement days, the famous film star Ray Milland, retired to Palos Verdes Estates. And he came in one day introducing himself, and of course we know who he was.
Wow.
And he bought a half pint of brandy. And he would go next door to the coffee shop right behind our building and have his morning coffee and pour some brandy into it. And
at Jackson the Plaza?
At Jackson the Plaza. Every 2-3 days, Ray Milland was in the store for
funny.
half a pint of brandy. And we started...
Was it Christian Brothers?
No, I think he'd get Corbel. He'd get Corbel. And the funny thing is, every time he'd come in, we'd hear a funny story about the movie industry. And the other day I just found out that he was born in Wales, because most of the stories he told us were Welsh jokes and Welsh.
Oh, that's why you didn't know that.
No.
Okay, that's funny.
So anyway, that's the story of the half pints.
Well, then now you know the other other story. We've heard all the stories, and on the podcast, folks, the listeners can go back to the 2 episodes we shot with Ed Maciana and Mike Krikorian of the LA Times, and hear some of the wine stories. But I'm going to go back a little further, and I go back to the entrepreneurial side of this business, because what I was a little disappointed with the conversation with Ed and Mike was we didn't get to some of these thought processes that you put together to do this. And one of the things that I talk about with customers wherever I go, and on podcasts as well with winemakers, is you didn't start this business necessarily to see how many bottles you could pump out the store. You started this business to help consumers choose a wine of good value, because you were tired of coming across from the pharmacy to choose the wines for them, but you were doing them a service by tasting everything you could get your hands on, saying this is the best value you can have, and if you're interested in wine or learning about it, here's the wine that you should taste.
Exactly. Actually, it was a self-education process. Let me tell you this. When we came to buy Palos Verdes Liquor and Spice, because it was part of a package deal of buying another pharmacy in my chain of pharmacies that I had put together over the years, I knew nothing about selling liquor or selling wine or running a liquor store. So I had to learn very fast, and obviously I wasn't interested in the truck driver beer business. I wasn't interested in the spirits business particularly, because for some reason the people in that community really gravitated towards our little wine section. And I remember some very special people who would come, and we'd stock that wine for them. I quickly had to learn about wine. So here I am. I bought a store. It's doing a good volume, but in this other stuff. And I noticed that I really should build the wine business and therefore learn it myself. So the first rule I made with all the salesmen that came in selling us liquor or wine was, if there is a new wine you want to put on my shelf, I have to taste it first. And this to them was,
that was kind of revolutionary.
Yeah,
at the time.
How come? Well, why? This is a Robert Mondavi wine. It's his new Sauvignon Blanc. Why can't you put it in? I want to taste it. And my reason for wanting to taste it was I wanted to learn about it more than anything else.
Well, that's important too, though.
It took me a year to go to all the wine events, the wine clubs in the LA area, and to all the wholesalers' tastings to develop a palate. And I really ended up liking it very much. So from there on, no wine got onto our shelves unless it was tasted by me. And we ended up with, as Paul has maybe expressed in the past or described in the past, the Tuesday tastings, where all the new wines that were being introduced by the salesman were put on a shelf in the back room. A coterie of 8 to 10 good friends, doctors, business associates were invited, always on Tuesdays at 5 o'clock, to come up and evaluate. Now, they had to work to do this. The minute they walked into this little area we did it in, and Paul Jr. fixed the table up.
That's right. I had to brown bag the stuff.
That's right.
And go up your makeshift ladder that you're
right in the storeroom.
that Mr. Chu made from the woodshop teacher in the high school. Okay.
Right.
Got to make sure you sell it. Tell them that stuff.
And each person was given a clipboard with blank sheets of the Davis 20-point evaluation of a wine. I had explained that to them, to this coterie of people who would come. There were about 50 different people I invited, but they were only about 8 to 10 people.
It became quite a social stigma to be invited by Paul Kalemkiarian.
Oh yeah, you had to get on the name on the list.
Yeah.
And so they'd taste the wine. They didn't know what they were tasting, and they made their notes on the University of California Davis enology department evaluation sheet. And I gathered those sheets, and from those sheets, plus my own opinion of the wine, a decision was made to stock that wine or not. And wow, did we have a variation of
opinions,
inputs.
I'm sure.
Of inputs.
Well, there's something interesting about that because, first of all, that is true. We still use Tuesday tasting day. It's slightly different, a little more automated. I have an online calendar, and the reps, and I'll enter. The one thing you taught me, more than that, but we'll talk about some of those things as well. But I taste everything, whether I can smell that it's off bad vinegar or otherwise. I taste it. You always taught me to taste for the flaws as well as the good stuff. But that Tuesday tasting, blindly, I just did it because you did it.
Right.
So now, fast forward 30-something years when I bought the company, it was not for $1. I want to throw that in there. Yeah. Then all of a sudden I've tasted somewhere around 90 to 100,000 wines because we just keep doing it. And it was, by the way, not only was it for the volume of wine to taste every week, but otherwise I'd have salespeople stand in line every day calling me, emailing me, texting me, can I come in, come in? And do you know that to this day, if somebody asks for a special day to taste because somebody is in town or whatever, that it just throws me off, that I'm like, oh man, I got to taste now.
That's right.
I already know after 30 years, every Tuesday I'm tasting and that's it. But that was revolutionary at the time to force the salespeople to taste. And I think you remember Bruce Nyer, who's still around. His name is Nyer Vineyards. His wines are made through and sold through Trinchero, your old friend, so to speak, Bob Trinchero. And he told me a story that's on the podcast as well. He says, well, sales manager at Joseph Phelps, what I would do, and this is like 1972 or 73, I would load the truck up and I would drive to Los Angeles.
Yeah,
and I'd stop at 5 stores.
Right.
And your father's store, Palos Verdes Wines and Spirits, the Duke of Bourbon, Wally's, and a couple others. And I'd go back. That's what the sales manager did.
At the wine merchant in Beverly Hills.
That's right, the wine merchant in Beverly Hills. Yeah, Dennis Overstreet.
Right,
and he goes, your dad reminded me of my professor at the University of Delaware, biology. He was tough, but he was fair.
Well, thank you. That's first I've heard of that. That's good.
Fair part might have been you who tasted everything.
Yeah, right. It's the only way. Now, how can you evaluate something that's made so beautifully and differently from different grapes in different proportions, blending or not blending, knowing the varietal character or not knowing the varietal character? It's necessary. It's not like liquor, or it's not like any other kind. It's not at all. Let me tell you a funny story about the tasting experiment. One of the wholesalers in L.A. came one day saying, Paul, we only have 43 cases of this. It's aged in our cellars. It is wonderful. And I said, well, let me taste it. So we went into the back room and I tasted it. It was a secondary Burgundy from France, and it had the aging character, and it was really very, very surprising for the price. I was really surprised. So I bought the batch. We featured it. It's among our newsletters.
I'll look for it.
But believe it or not, when the wines all arrived and we sent them out, to the program, would you believe about a third of the 43 cases were over-aged and were actually had passed their peak period?
How did you find that out?
From the customers who received them in the mail, because for some reason
That's a silly question.
the case I had tasted it from when they brought in the sample was a good one. It was aged well, and I bet you that wholesaler knew about that. And this is the place to take it to Paul. He'll get rid of all of it at one time for us.
And of course, I probably adopted this guarantee from you. You replaced the wines, probably.
Oh yes, we had to.
So that was, let's just pretend that was like 1979, 80 something early on, right? 88, 84. If you bought 43 cases,
early 80s,
yeah,
in the early 80s.
So I sent out a Mont Gras, a Chilean Bordeaux blend that I got from one of the great wholesalers around here. I tasted it 3 times. 2012. Tasted it 3 times, 3 gorgeous bottles of wine. Like one of these deals, like, man, what an opportunity to taste an aged wine. What's going to happen from a Chilean wine of caliber when it ages? It brought it in. I put it on sale as an email special, and I went out. So this is a true story. I went out to the warehouse about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and there's a bottle of this Montgras red blend from Chile, and this neck had snapped off. So it's just the shouldered bottle and a big hole.
Yeah.
And I could smell from where I was standing that the wine had turned.
Yeah.
It was bad. And I go, Jose, what happened to this? He goes, oh, the neck fell off when I took it out of the box. I go, it's really good. How long has this been? He said, it just happened about 10 minutes ago. I go, well, there's something wrong. So I said, get me 3 more bottles. Tasted 3 more bottles. They were great. So now I've tasted 6 bottles from this, I don't know, 2 pallets worth, 112 cases worth of this wine. And all of a sudden, the phone calls start coming in. As soon as the wine goes out, we sold it all in a couple of days. Phone call goes out, comes in, and now we're starting to see a 50% return on bad wines.
Oh, my goodness.
So I go to the warehouse and I get another one, and I can taste it.
Yeah.
But I had the one bottle that Jose had broken had already smelled bad. It was a problem. And I finally found one in a case. And so I sent out an email immediately. And you know that every person that responded to the email, exactly 50% of them were bad.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that one pallet may have gone through a different path.
Right.
It may have gone through some heat.
Right.
It may have gone through, who knows where it's stored somewhere else, not where their other pallet was stored.
In the truck.
Because it was exactly like 50%. If somebody got 6 bottles, 3 were bad. Somebody got 12 bottles, 6 were bad. But that's testimony to the commitment we made to making sure that the client gets a great experience of a great wine. And we understand that you don't like a wine. Like, for instance, you ever returned a wine at a restaurant for not liking it or because it's bad?
Once in a rare while we did that, but it's sort of embarrassing, and you sort of sit there and you don't want to do it, and you make excuses to yourself
exactly,
that you don't want to do that. It's really another situation. I was just thinking of something that I feel it's critical in what we do. The important thing is that the wine represents what it's supposed to be with no flaws in it, and it's our palate that says it doesn't have the flaws. Well, once in a while we might make a misjudgment, but on the whole, this is the formula I used to tell my early members. For every 100 California wines that I taste, 80 are okay. 15 are exceptional. 5 shouldn't even be in the bottle.
That's right.
Now,
I can't tell that those percentages have changed, but it's I still have something very similar to that.
Well, let me wait a minute. I want to finish. Let me tell you about the imports. For every 100 imports I would taste, because if you remember, our original program involved 1 red, 1 white, of which 1 was an import, 1 was a domestic. So I was tasting as many imports as I was tasting. In the imports, of every 100 imports I would taste, 10 to 15 shouldn't be in the bottle. Only 5 were exceptional, and the rest were barely acceptable. That's the formula. I actually traced that and tracked it.
I don't, and I remember because we would write. Well, we do that still. We have import domestic. We don't alternate each month.
No.
like you used to do it. But
Right.
I think that's accurate still as far as what comes in through the door. Either because they want to send us their crap and they don't think we know any better, which is what I tell the French and Italian reps sometimes just for fun. But there's certainly a percentage of both sides of that import and domestic calculation where the wine shouldn't have been bottled. And part of the conversation is this. If you spent the money to plant the vineyard, then you are going to spend, and you spent the money to pick the grapes, and you spent the money to ferment them and store them and bottle them, you are going to sell them.
That's right.
Because you can't afford to do it. It's a difficult business. It goes from vintage to vintage for many wineries, and it becomes a difficult proposition when you have a short crop, or you have to sell the juice off because you they make mistakes. You know, these guys make mistakes. Right. So that's why we're here, right?
Right.
That's how we.
It's back to the same old story. You have 5,000 gallons of a wine you just made. You don't yourself like it. What are you going to do with it?
That's right.
You're going to bottle it and try and get rid of it.
You give it to somebody, they'll blend it off or they'll do something. And I taste. One thing that I think is a little bit different than when you were running the show than when I do is I get a lot of barrel samples. I get a lot of tank samples. I get a lot of post-fermented wine that's been unfinished, unfined, looking for a home. I see that a lot.
Yes.
And I'm going to peel back a little bit this what they call white labels or private labels now. But one of the problems that the industry's having, and you like to send me in the mail all kinds of solicitations of competitive clubs that are doing things, and like the National Geographic has a club, and this Wall Street Journal has a club, and the NPR radio has a club. They don't have clubs, right? Somebody's curating this for them, using their name, paying them 30% or 20% for the right of the name, and you think you belong to the National Geographic Club. Has nothing to do with it, okay? And what has happened in this industry now is those guys, which are capitalized by venture capital. They get $20 million, $10 million, $50 million, it doesn't matter. Some people have raised $70 million over the course of the last 10 years. And that model tells the wine manufacturers or the people that are selling the wines, you must buy it as cheap as you can and you must sell it for as much as you can because I'm a venture capitalist and my metric is the following. How much money do I get back and when do I get it back?
Yeah.
That's what they do. It doesn't matter if it's wine, computers, hardware, gardening equipment. If you're venture capitalized, you're under the bind of that metric.
Right.
Because I want my money back, and I want it back as soon as I can, and I want more than I gave you. Right.
Right.
And so what's that's done in this industry is forced a lot of these 50,000 gallon bladders of €1 wines, and I've said this to the consumers many times and listeners, but it's true. And what that's done now to our benefit, okay?
Right?
If you were in the business, you're sitting next to me still at the Wine of the Month Club. Now I'm seeing more and more juice, both bulk and bottled by brands, really quality juice, much less money than they were 2 years ago, because the consumers that are buying into this Groupon stuff, $3 bottle wines, are taking a sale away from the legitimate brands.
Yes.
Those legitimate brands now have to get the stuff off the floor because they just picked 2019. They're going to ferment it. The 2018's in the tank. That's going in the bottle. And what's on the floor has to come out.
Right.
It's just, supply and demand, right?
Inventory control.
Right. So we're seeing so much wine right now, and everybody's feeling the pinch of these. And this is all going to flatten out because the consumer's going to figure out that stuff's junk and there's no ethereal experience to drinking those kinds of wines. And I want to go back to what you just said. And that is, our job is to produce a wine and to show a wine that says, this is what Sonoma, Alexander Valley Cabernet should taste like.
Right.
It represents the terroir, the soil, the weather, whatever else you want to throw in there. So the winemaker's philosophy as terroir. And if you don't like this kind of wine, then we recommend when you go to the wine shop that you don't ask for Alexander Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, right?
Right.
Because and I think what's happened a little bit more than back in the day of the early days of the wine business in California, which was the 70s, and we're going to talk about that. The expression of the soil and the terroir and the winemaker's philosophy and all that goes into a bottle of wine is what is becoming the most important and popular thing with wine drinkers. Oh. Now, there's still the guy that wants the $3 bottle. That's fine. I'm happy that. But
that's alcohol.
Right. Let's get good $3 bottles, right? As best as we can get. But there's a movement, and it's the same with food, right? The farm-to-table food movement is about expression of the vegetable. Right. And so wine now is headed that direction, and that part is fascinating for me. So I'm going to go back to Egypt right now.
Oh, my goodness.
I've never been there myself.
Yeah, you gotta go.
You're a young kid in Egypt, and your dad's sending you down, or your grandfather's sending you to the wine shop, right?
My grandpa didn't drink. Oh. My dad worked for the British Forces, and he enjoyed a glass of wine every so often. And I remember as a 10-year-old saying, "Paul, take this empty fiasco." The Italian Chianti bottles, those
wicker
with the straw around it.
Straw, yeah, right.
Because he had bought one some time back, and he he drank what was in there over a period of, he'd have a glass an evening. And he says, go to Mr. Guzelimian's pharmacy. And right next door to Mr. Guzelimian's pharmacy is a large store with 2 big barrels inside. That's a wine shop. And he says, go to the man and in Arabic tell him, half sweet, half dry. And here's 10 piastres to pay him by. So I knew where Mr. Guzelimian's pharmacy was, but I didn't know what was next door. So for the first time, and from there on, I did it about once every 2-3 weeks. That's how long it took for him to finish that fiasco. I'd go into that store and hear these 2 huge big barrels of wine, I think about a 500-gallon type size, as I got to see what the sizes of these barrels of wine were in the wine industry. And I'd tell him half sweet, half dry. So he'd go to one and open the spigot and fill the fiasco half full of that one. And it was a red wine. And then he'd go to the one next to it, and again it was another red wine, and he'd fill that in. And so Dad liked it blended, half sweet, half red.
So demi-sec.
I tasted it once or twice. I hated it. As a kid, how can you like the stuff?
Oh, that's terrible.
But that was my history.
Egyptian.
Original introduction to wine.
So wouldn't you want to know, like, the appellation of that wine and the grape content? What grape is it? Vinus vinifera? Or was it Vinus Lambrusco? Or what?
Oh, who knows? I should look into that.
Yeah,
there must
that'd be interesting to know.
Sort of a wine industry in Egypt is not a popular industry because of the Muslim religion, but it is available there, and I remember it like yesterday.
We're going to fast forward just a few years, and you went to King Farouk College, which was a Muslim college.
Yeah,
right?
King Fuad One University. Farouk's father.
Farouk's
pharmacy
father.
school.
Of course, everybody knows this.
Yeah. When the monarchy was in Egypt, we were still there. The reason we lived there, Paul, was because my parents and grandparents were refugees from the ethnic cleansing that the Turks were doing of the Armenians out of Cilicia. So they ended up in refugee camps in the early 1900s, 1910, 1915, in Syria, and then from Syria into Egypt. Egypt was a very welcoming country at the time to a lot of these refugees. Anyway, so Grandpa and Dad settled in Cairo. I was born there and went to the Egyptian University, became a pharmacist, but immigrated to the United States when I was 20. Because
that was an Arabic college. It was Muslim based.
Oh yeah, it was a state university.
Young man.
State
university. And so I remember you went back maybe to try to get your. They never gave you a diploma, right?
No, because I was a graduate of an English high school. I went to the English Mission College, which was in Cairo, and it was a high school, actually a full education from kindergarten all the way through high school, supported by the English missionaries, and I'm sure financially supported from England, and a very successful educational institution in Cairo. Dad sent me there. My uncle went there too, youngest uncle. But because it was an English degree, a degree from a foreign high school, it did not qualify to be admitted to the Egyptian university. You had to take an Arabic language exam.
Which you spoke.
Which I spoke, but I was not fluent in its writing and its reading and grammar. I knew street Arabic, and so they accepted me as an auxiliary student. And when I finished the 4 years, They just gave me my documents of credentials of having taken the 4 years.
That sounds like Mike's schooling. I'm an auxiliary student the whole way through.
Yeah. Hey, you did much better than that at SC, buddy. Anyway,
So you left school.
I never had a diploma from there, and SC was welcoming. USC was welcoming to me when I came to this country.
That's what I wrote in this note when I sent to you beforehand, because I've never heard this conversation, this part of it anyway, because what a risk in this day of immigration and the heightened level of understanding of immigration. You came to this country, but you had to be loaded with fears to get here. You didn't know what you were in for.
That's right.
Were you accepted to USC before you got there?
Yes. Fortunately.
Who told you to apply to USC in the first place?
Well, interesting story. My father and his 4 brothers and father and mother were in that ethnic cleansing program. His sister was in Los Angeles, and she had come to Los Angeles at the age of 16 as a picture bride, just to get away from the Middle East. So he wrote to her and said, can I send my son down there? He's just graduated from pharmacy school, but he doesn't have a diploma. There's going to be a revolution here. They're going to get rid of the monarchy, I'm sure. Let's get out of here, and maybe he can help us get out. So would you accept him there? Fortunately, his sister, his his aunt, and his cousin pooled together $142 and sent me a ticket from Alexandria to New York, and
money,
and I sent my credentials to her. She took them to the SC office, and they said, yes, we'll accept him as a foreign student. And I was part of the foreign student group at SC when I arrived. Thank goodness SC opened its arms.
I know
to
exactly what you were when I was at SC. I knew a lot of foreign students.
All these foreign students, they're running around. I'll tell you a funny story, Paul. I'd just gotten here, and I'm so thrilled. The campus, the School of Pharmacy, the welcoming. And it's the second day or the third day, I'm in the lobby of the pharmacy building. And here was this real good-looking, tall fellow who apparently was he was maybe student body president of the pharmacy school or whatever.
Something like that.
And he's putting up a bulletin on the bulletin board for the Rho Pi fraternity. And I'm standing right behind him. And I said, excuse me, what is a fraternity? I had no idea what a fraternity was. Here's this
The Rho Pi. I don't remember them being on campus when I was there, but who knows what kind of raucous environment that was.
He looked at me sort of funny and said, who's this guy?
He's this guy with this Arabic accent. Well, did you have an English accent then?
Very strong British English accent, yeah. It's sort of... Some people pick it up once in a while.
A little bit, yeah. So you did not come through Ellis Island, if I remember. You came through New York.
No. I just landed.
Ellis Island was closed by then.
Yeah, well, no, Ellis Island is... Yeah, well, it was closed, but not through the normal immigration. I came as a student.
Yeah, that's right.
I came as a student.
So we were your birthday. Was it your birthday we watched that film that Sharon found? My sister Sharon, the judge here in San Diego, had found a film that was about the Armenians that landed in Cairo in the 30s and 40s, and it was all in Arabic. And my dad was able to understand the whole thing, but also had English subtitles. But what I thought was interesting about that was much of the signage throughout Cairo in this video, in this movie, was either in Arabic or Arabic and French.
Yeah, right.
Was French the number 2 language of Cairo at the time?
For a long time, French was the number 2 language in most of Africa even. The French had a strong influence in Egypt, but it changed to English in the 30s and the 40s. In school, at the English Mission College, which was all in English, of course, run by English missionaries, we had a French class every day and we had an Arabic class every day. And if you had a French origin parents or you spoke French at home, you were in the upper French class of your class, and they had a lower. And if you were an Arab kid or a Muslim kid, and there were some Muslim students in class, you had an upper Arabic and upper and lower Arabic. And we also had an English class every day, scripture, arithmetic, the usual things. But there was always French every day, always Arabic every day, and always English language every day. And guess what? I was in the lower French and the lower Arabic, both cases. However, it was good enough for me to learn both languages.
Well, yeah, because you're an auxiliary student as it is. So,
Yeah.
right?
That's right.
And I just want to tell the readers, this is I think I'm going on my 5th year of studying French. I've studied it because, my father speaks it, and it's one of the 5 languages he speaks. And I used to ask him, I'd say, Dad, when did you learn, how do you remember this French? He goes, I learned it in high school. I'm like, what do you mean high school? I don't remember anything from high school. And here he is still speaking French. I'll admit his spelling is not the best, but that's okay.
That's right.
And my French teachers throughout the world that I use on Skype and italki are like flabbergasted by this when I tell them this story, Dad. So it's pretty impressive that you remember all that. But all right, so you come to this country, you're working at SC. The dean gives you a job to start the pharmacy school, the pharmacy on campus for practicing pharmacists that the school never had, which is a fascinating story in itself. I'm going to kind of go past that. You went to work afterwards for corporate America, right?
Yes.
Boyle and Company.
Boyle and Company.
And you created, as a chemist, some products. You researched stuff.
Right.
Was it because of your background in your father and your grandfather or whatever it was around you in your youth in Cairo that you had the entrepreneurial spirit to get out and do your own pharmacy thing, or is that just like a whimsical thing? How did you get out of corporate America and have I'm going to say the guts, because quickly, when Sandra was pregnant with Sarah, my oldest daughter, and I was looking at a career change, and you asked me to come and check out the Wine of the Month Club, see if you wanted to do it, and I was just coming off a pretty entrepreneurial deal with Telenomics, and I'm like, maybe I should go back to corporate America and just have that steady, stable income, and go home at 5:00. How did you evolve from coming out of corporate America into I'm going to start a pharmacy and be on my own?
Well, it actually, the sequential aspect of it had to do with the corporate America part being prior to the pharmacy opportunity at USC. The dean called me in one day. I'm doing my master's degree, okay? And I'm halfway through it. And the dean calls me in one day. He says, my good friend Harlow Boyle needs a pharmacist to do compounding because he has some new products he wants to put out. And he said, would you like the job? It's part-time, and I know you have very strong compounding background, which was very heavy at the University of Cairo, not as heavy here as in the United States. I said, sure, Dean. So because my master's degree work was any time I wanted to do it, I did my master's work in the afternoon, my research in that field. I went to Boyle and Company in the mornings and developed 5 different products from the compounding point of view. I didn't do the original chemical research. They weren't a large enough company to do the original chemical research. They were all assembling new medications in a more palatable form. In fact, your mother always complained I'd come home smelling of various flavored cough syrups I was making once.
Making cough syrups. And a little bit of a buzz from the codeine.
Right. I'm making the cough syrup palatable, you see. Yes. So anyway.
Delicious.
So, but then I wasn't very happy, but I was happy with the pay, and that was fine. Well, the next thing the dean did is give me the opportunity to start the pharmacy on campus, the university dispensary, which now is called the University Pharmacy at SC, and it was a training ground for students who couldn't get training jobs. Well, that really I didn't like working in a large firm where I got a check once a week, and I was under the guy above me, and he could decide on my fate if he wanted to. I wanted to be my own boss, and here was the dean giving me an opportunity to start a pharmacy, and I had such a wonderful experience starting and operating that store that the minute I had the opportunity through a whole set of different circumstances, the opportunity came for me to open my own store, be my own boss, make my own decisions. However,
never look back.
Have the opportunity to evaluate the long-term benefit of it. And obviously, pharmacists who owned a store were doing well. Well, it ended up into a six pharmacy chain, which was not a drugstore chain. It was a pharmacy chain, small medical building pharmacies.
Well, you bought and sold 12,
Yeah.
I think.
But in between, as our competitors decided to sell or retire, why get somebody else come in? We just would buy them and merge them with our store.
So did you ever look back? Because I worked for Xerox, and I still rely on that experience as one of the great sales organizations of the country at the time, and the world actually at that time. And I don't look back and regret, having to cut my own teeth on these things. And I think without Xerox, and then the next experience I had with Telenomics, starting with literally nothing except a fishbowl of business cards, prepared me to take on the Wine of the Month Club, not being as much a wine devotee at the time, but the mechanics of and the ability to handle the risk.
Right.
So you came out of corporate America. You knew that and I agree with you. There's a certain stigma around having somebody that can control your purse strings at will. But that's not to say, what we do is not for everybody. In other words, I think I have wonderful friends who had a great career in a big banks and those kinds of things, and they're retired on their pension, and it's the exact perfect thing for their livelihood and their life, and something different for ours. But there's a lot of risk to it. So did you evaluate that risk at the time?
Well,
you just thought, no, I'm going to do it on my own.
Well, in a way, I did, because the ability to do your own innovation of something that you're good at as a pharmacist it's very exciting to be the one to innovate that. What was the innovation? And maybe we haven't talked about that. Here was a pharmacy that I was able to do for the university. It worked fine. Now I was given the opportunity to put a pharmacy in a small medical building with 3 doctors. Now that's not enough for one pharmacy as far as prescriptions volume goes. But the concept was, if you can have your 3 doctors as your basic support of minimum volume, how about the neighborhood? So in my mind, I devised the concept of 50% of the business from the medical building, but 50% of the business from the neighborhood. How do you get that? You advertise to them. So when I opened my first store, tiny little store, only 500 square feet, a nice pharmacy in a small one-story medical building.
Van Ness.
I am at Van Ness Pharmacy in Inglewood.
This is Van Ness in Manchester.
Van Ness in Manchester.
Heart of Inglewood.
In L.A., right, in Inglewood. I immediately sent 5,000 letters out to a resident list that I bought from, here's the mail order part, Paul.
Yeah, you've been doing mail order a long time. I knew.
Just down the street from us was a secretarial service. And I forget her name. I think her name was Frances. And she had the names and the addresses of that community, 5,000 lists for sale.
Yeah.
I think I have a letter somewhere in thing. It was a long letter. It was an unusual letter. It was a narrow envelope because they're cheaper, but then the letter was folded over 4 times. The letter was a 14-inch letter.
I'm sure you still have it because you collect everything. Look at this office.
Right, yeah. 14-inch legal size, but only 6 inches wide. with a long story about why they should support me.
Where would they be going before that? Like Rexall or
Well,
something?
here's the key. Don't have your prescription filled on Wilshire Boulevard when you go to your medical building over there, because when you need a refill of it, you have to go all the way back to Wilshire Boulevard to pick it up. Bring me the prescription, and I'll fill it for you. Then you see, I'll deliver it to you free locally.
With Wes. Wes will deliver
With Wes, our driver, delivering it. So, and it worked, Paul, because all 5 of my pharmacies were based on the same principle: small stores in small medical buildings, with a recent graduate that I knew would make a good manager, who could own 49% of the store. I gave him the opportunity to buy in up to 49%. And we advertised to the neighborhood plus the doctors in the building.
That's amazing.
That was a philosophy of the prescription shops.
Well, it had to come from one of these dozens of books I found in the boxes lately on how to run a pharmacy or mail order, when I didn't realize now that you had done mail order back in the day with this letter.
That's
and,
right.
You know, folks, I would get up, and when I was, that store was around when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. I'd come to work once in a while with my dad. He'd put me in front of a stack of I don't know, brochures for some product and a rubber stamp with this Advanced Pharmacy on it. And for 25 cents an hour, I'd stamp them.
Right.
And then Wes, the old gentleman that was the driver, which that picture was in one of the books you sent me recently, would take me to school and tease me about my little girlfriends that would come out to the gate when he picked me up. So we're here you are, you're working in the store, and you read an article about Princess Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth coming to town, and she got served a California Cabernet from Charles Krug, the special selection. I think it's like a 57 or 56 or something. And so that conversation emerged during your interviews with Mike Krikorian. So I decided to check it out. And so I do a lot of research, Dad, and we talked about it a little bit on the phone, but I find that that's true. Eisenhower was the first president in the U.S. to serve domestic wine to a visiting dignitary. However, he did not serve it at the state dinners. He served it to Queen Elizabeth at one of the luncheons.
Okay.
The first president to serve, and it was Charles Krug Cabernet, at a state dinner was Lyndon B. Johnson at a Pakistani dinner or something. But it is documented that Eisenhower was the first, and it's so interesting to me because I was able to contact the museum and all this little history, and even the guys that were doing the research were like, wow, I didn't know this, that everything else was French. They were serving Burgundies and Bordeaux and fancy champagnes and these things, and all of a sudden Charles Krug, comes into the play, and now of course it's pretty common to have domestic wines at the White House, but that sparked an interest.
Well, it was an unusual one. It wasn't that I was into wine at that time. What happened was this: the store was doing well. I had some extra dollars. I'm reading the newspaper, and here's this entertainment that President Eisenhower was doing for the Queen Elizabeth, or Princess at the time. And here it gave the name of a wine and the year and the selection. And I was a member of the Lions Club in Inglewood at the time, and most of the service clubs, there are only 2 from every profession or
that's
business.
the rule, supposedly.
So we only had one man who owned a liquor store. He was a wonderful fellow, but it was the traditional liquor store, just loaded with liquor and beer, hardly any wine. So I told Wes, take this article and tell so-and-so, my Lions Club friend, to order me some of this wine. And I circled it on the newspaper thing. So Wes goes there, and by golly, the next week, because once a week the orders come into the stores, the next week, here comes 3 bottles of Charles Krug Cabernet Sauvignon Special Selection. And at that time, I had really no serious interest in wine. My serious interest in wine occurred 10, 15 years later when I bought the Palos Verdes liquor and spice shop and had to quickly learn all about wine.
Well, so we now we're there. Now we got this wine, I don't know if I've told you this. Maybe I did. But when Sandra and I got engaged, and that was 1986, we went down to the Tufankian house in the desert, and in the closet, up in the highest part, which would be the hottest part, particularly the desert, was a case of Charles Krug Special Select.
What?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that was like an 84 or 85 or something. It was
Really?
like just one year in the bottle.
Really?
And I thought, wait a minute, I kind of remember this brand from your story. But
That's
so
funny.
you've got this great story about the pharmacy and I wrote a brochure about the idea that I had the story all wrong all this time. And that is, there were two pharmacies in Malaga Cove, which is the entrance to Palos Verdes Estates. And your store was about in the middle, and then there was a wonderful store on the right that had a diner on it, the burger joint.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
It was also a little bit more makeup and stuff as well at that
Yeah.
store.
It was a general drugstore.
General drugstore. Then next to that, with the same wall, sharing a wall, was the liquor store. And
Right.
when you went to buy the pharmacy, because I think Mr. Reese was
Right.
getting tired, I had been telling the story all along that he insisted on selling you the liquor store, but it's the other way around.
No. What happened was Walter Reese was the personality in Palos Verdes as far as a liquor store owner. In fact, every time the Palos Verdes Breakfast Club had a golf day, he never played golf. He'd ride in the golf cart with a case of half-pint
There goes a half pint again.
vodkas and distributing it to all his buddies in the golf cart.
I knew I was on the right track with those half pints of
Anyway,
vodka.
so I hear that Walt Reese is for sale. He was tired and elderly, and so the realtor came to me and said, "Are you interested in the store?" I looked at the books. He's not making any money. No wonder he's selling. And he's been there for years. The only people that were making any money were the soda fountain next to him. He was getting good rent from the soda fountain. But basically his bottom line was negative. I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, and then the realtor said, "He also owns the liquor store, but he's not selling the liquor store." I said, "Well, do you have any numbers on the liquor store?" He said, "No, but I'll get them for you." He says he might be interested. So he gets me the numbers. Liquor store's making good money, and Walter Reese wanted to not sell it. I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll buy both or nothing." And the realtor went back to Walter Reese, and he hemmed and hawed, and he just wanted to get out of there anyway. So I bought the drugstore and the liquor store, merged my pharmacy with this old-looking drugstore,
Yep.
threw the soda fountain out. That was another big mistake. We had a big fight about that with the...
He still had the guy's tomato sauce.
Right. And but then here was a liquor store that was making money. And by the way, that was the first time the prescription shops used outside investors. Because it was going to be quite a chunky buy and he wanted cash, I went to 5 of my well-known physician friends,
Yeah.
Dr. McFarland, Dr. Cardy, a few others. They each put $10,000 up, and we were able to pay cash for the whole thing and buy the whole thing
Wow.
that way.
I didn't know that.
Within 2 years, I paid the
them
doctors
back?
off with 50% profit.
And a couple of bottles of Charles Krug Special
In the
Select.
meantime, they got lots of
lots of wine.
But it was quite an experience. Anyway,
So fast forward now. Go ahead.
yes.
I'm playing I'm at the time I'm 50, so it was 11 years ago. I'm playing in the alumni baseball game. This is true, and I'm standing on the on-deck circle, getting ready to hit at a 50-year-old and playing a bunch of teenagers in baseball. And one of my teammates at the time was Jeff Reese, who was the nephew of Walter Reese, or the son of grandson. Maybe it was the grandson of Walter Reese, and his parents are sitting in the stands, and I'm swinging the bat and Jeff comes over, we're talking, and I introduced myself. I said, "Hi, I'm Paul Kalemkiarian." She goes, "Yeah, we know." Like there was this huge problem still 40 years later with me being on the field with their son. I mean, it really was like obvious that they understood. I was the son of the guy who took the store.
Took the store away. Hey, I either bought both or not.
Yeah, okay, so in the famous picture of you and I, which I got to find the rest of those pictures. We're in front of the beer box. We're looking at the display of the Wine of the Month Club, and you could go behind the beer box and you'd walk down this narrow hall, wood floor,
right,
and you'd go through these two doorways, right, and you'd literally be behind the prescription counter where you would count the pills.
Right.
I mean, literally behind.
Right.
So you could walk between the two stores, no one could see you. You don't remember that?
No. I think they closed that off. No, I don't think that ever was a.
Yes, you could.
Really?
Oh, yeah. You could. You would walk around the back because I remember doing it.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. You didn't go outside to do that. No way.
It's possible.
Boy, I don't know more about the store than you do.
Yeah, that's right. You know more.
Jeez.
I don't remember.
So I remember. So we've talked a little bit about you selecting the wines, and we put them up on the front because you didn't need to come from the pharmacy counter every time to select a wine. Right. And this was the purpose of, and the same purpose we have today, is just to find good values. It's not to pump up volume.
Well, the heart of that story, early story, is this. In the early days when I was spending more time in the liquor store because I was learning about wine, Mrs. Jones would come in and she'd say, I have a very special guest coming tonight, the president of my husband's company. I need something to impress him with. And what would you recommend? Pretty soon, I'd recommend something and I'd hear back from her saying how much they enjoyed it. This happened enough times that while I was in the pharmacy filling a prescription, I'd get a call from my manager in the liquor store saying, Mrs. Thomas is in, and she says she only wants to talk to you, and she wants your recommendation regarding a wine. Would you please come and talk to her? She's a very good customer. All right, so I'd walk over to recommend something. Well, I got so tired of doing that I picked, every time I'd taste wine with the salesman, I'd pick two for that month, and that's how the Wine of the Month Club started. I'd pick two. I'd order 2 to 3 cases of each one of those two. Well, usually one was an import. Usually one was a red, and the other one a white. And I'd have them stack it up in the front of the store. And whenever the store manager was told to call Paul about it, well, Paul says this is absolutely unbelievably good. That's how.
Or don't bother me. I'm behind the prescription counter.
Right. Well, pretty soon, Paul Jr. would start delivering those 2-packs locally because people would say, "Send us what's in that." And pretty soon after that, we'd start getting mail from people who moved away from PV who say, "Send us a case of everything you've got in that front counter on a monthly basis. That was your selection." That's how the Wine of the Month Club started.
Well, I don't want to, throw any water on the fire here, but that first day when literally the day I got my license, I set out to deliver those things, and I fried the clutch in the truck because I thought first gear was second gear, or second gear was first gear, and I got back and you said, "What smells?" I go, "It might be the clutch." So this is happening, and now the one story that I just kind of remembered, and you just told me not too long ago, but I do remember the following: we went to Hawaii as a family, and we rented a condo, and this is the famous grape, the grape story when Mom, insisted with the realtor at the end that, we were not throwing grapes in the condo, which we actually were, because they kept finding them behind the couches and stuff. But that same trip, I'll never forget, you're sitting on the balcony, you've got stacks and stacks of these mail order books, and you're trying to figure out, can this business work? Is the idea valid? You already experienced some mail order, but I had not known that prior. And you come up with this formula, which is it's $5 for the bottle of wine, and $1 was profit, and $1 was submitted for marketing, $1 was for the wine, $1 was, I don't remember what it was, but it was a very simple formula, and I hate to tell you this, it's not working now, that's for sure. But back then, what was the premise of this $1? 5 pieces of the $5.
Yes, I'll tell you. And it goes back to the pharmacies again. when I had the 5 pharmacies, I started a medical rental business.
Yeah, PSP it was called.
PSP, prescription shop products.
My brother was able to clean all the commodes. That was great.
Right. So I go to the big convention of the rental people, and here's this. Other than Abbey Rents, which was the largest competitor,
I remember that
in that field, there was one guy that really did a phenomenal job out in the country. I think he was in the Palm Desert area. And we're talking a little bit, and I said, how do you price a rental? How do you price a commode or a wheelchair? How much you're going to charge for that wheelchair per month, especially if it's a specialized wheelchair? Well, he says, I start with the first dollar that I get from them is for me.
The first dollar.
The first dollar.
I forget the last dollar.
Okay. Then he says, I take the cost of the item and I divide it by 24 because I figure it has a shelf life of 24 months. And I add that to the $1. Then he says, I have an operation cost of my warehouse and my staff, and I divide that by the number of days that rental's going to be, and I add that. So he says, I come up with the number of $19.95 a month for renting a wheelchair or whatever else. But he says, don't forget, that first dollar of the $19.95 is mine. My return comes first, not what I paid for it, not what I pay my employees, not what I pay in rent. That was where the $1
That's
came.
fascinating to me. It made it so simple. So at that time, the wine month club was $5.
$5. So I allowed $1 for myself, $1 for overhead, and I could buy the wine. If I could buy the wine for $2, $2.50, it was well and good. But I would never buy anything over $3.
Yes.
Because
At that time.
I wanted that $1 and the $1 and the $3.
Let's see. So that's how it works backwards.
Yeah.
If you start with $1 in your pocket, you'll never overspend because you're not taking it out of your pocket.
Right.
Well, it's funny that Sandra and I, we work together. We've been working together for 25 years, and she's, as you know, a very analytical CPA type, the perfect counterbalance for a spatial whack job like me. So, but we still do that calculation. Now, the profit side's different. A little bit, some things are different, but we still go through and take all the packages that we've shipped that year, at the end of the year or that month, and we divide it by the gross margin. So we understand how much, the number of hours that it took to administrate the order.
Sure.
Okay? So the customer service department, the rent, whatever it is, that applies toward administration. And then we also determine how much of each bottle or each shipment what the overhead to the warehouse guys was. So that's the rent of the warehouse, the machine, whatever we do back there, Jose's time and Sergio's time, those guys' time. And we come up with a number. And that number's been pretty stable over the years because as volume's gone up, there's a little economies of scale, but it's a number that's very important for us to understand in a quick, broad stroke where we're at.
Right.
So you're sitting on the balcony, you're going, I'm going to do this thing, and it's going to work. And, I have no issues bringing this up because the Wine of the Month Club has been nimble enough throughout those years and all the way through today to work with the times. So you started with out of the wine shop. I think he sold it like 86. He sold everything? 85?
A little earlier than that, 80.
80 something for the shop and the so there's a one pharmacy in PV. You collapse it down to about a third of what the total was before, and that and I still have vendors today, Dad. Still, people go, yeah, I went to your dad's store. And it was a pharmacy, and it was like a pharmacy that had liquor, and had booze upstairs. I'm like, yeah, that's the one.
Oh yeah, in the early days, the little store where we moved the other store, a couple of customers standing waiting for their prescriptions. In walks the guy from Young's Market or
Yeah,
one of the other places
exactly.
with 5 cases on his trolley, and he comes 3 times through,
Yeah.
excuse me, and goes,
He goes back.
by.
I remember that
And he
upstairs.
goes into the back room, and in the back room I had one guy packing
The wines.
shipping.
So he's packing. So this store was. I wonder if that's even legal today to be licensed to dispense pills and alcohol at the same time. It
Well,
probably is.
we're pharmacists, can do anything like that.
These days,
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap this up real fast here, but I want to just bring it to today's time, and that would be through the idea that you were setting up at trade shows. You started with the doctors and the attorneys, thinking that these guys had disposable income, so they could afford to buy wines, and they were semi-successful. But it wasn't until somebody said, "Hey, you got to go check out the LA County Fair, where there's 1.5 million people that show up."
Exactly.
That
It was a quick way of building up membership without having to spend significant dollars on mail order solicitation, because that's the only other solicitation you can do in a business like the Wine of the Month Club or this type of operation. We did the dentist show in Napa. We did a couple of local county medical shows, and these people are moneyed people, so they were interested. But all of a sudden, somebody told me, look into LA County Fair, and that's 2 million people visiting it in a 10-day period. And there is a wine competition going on always with Nathan Croman, the writer of the LA Times.
Wines,
And I called up to find out, and they wanted $2,000 for the booth. And I said, "Oh, no, I can't do that." But I'd given her my name and what I wanted to do. But I said, I don't think I can afford that right now. 2 days later, I get a phone call from the person that managed all the booths for the show, saying, "This is Mrs. So-and-so. We're opening tomorrow, and I just had a cancellation of a 20 by 20 booth."
20 by 20. It's a big booth,
yeah,
folks.
The 10 by 10 was $2,000. She said, "I can't have a 20 by 20 booth empty. You can have it for free if you can mobilize in 24 hours to decorate it." Can you imagine?
Yeah, never have. Which a 20 by 20 booth is a big booth. Having done the fair. So that launched the fair stuff, and I have to tell you a metric real fast before we wrap this up, because we went from that was 1984, and we ended up doing shows until 2007. And you taught me to take the total number of dollars spent on the show divided by the number of people that signed up that were legit, and now you have your cost per customer, what it costs to acquire them.
Right.
And that is still one of the most important metrics in this industry, all the way across from the venture capitalized clubs like even Wink, Wink, which is a winery, but the wine.com, all the companies that compete in this space use that metric. And what's interesting now is I've talked to some very serious venture capitalists in the industry. One very, very famous one who's on Shark Tank. His name is Kevin O'Leary. Great conversation. He called and we've discussed wine. He's quite a wine guy. And he says, what I've seen so far in this industry is somebody selling dollar bills for 80 cents. So they're paying $1 to get a customer, but they're only getting 80 cents out of the customer. And one of the things that was attractive about the shows at the time was you could spend $1 and get $1.50.
Right.
Almost the first shipment.
Right.
So there was an acquisition cost back in the early days. One of the years when I did the show in 1995, I think it was, we paid only $9 to get a customer.
Wow.
But the difference was that customer, we shook his hand. We had a conversation. He knew who we were. He talked to Larry. He talked to me. He talked to whoever's working in the booth. And there's a connection when you do that.
Right.
Today's internet marketing, there's no connection.
No.
It's the story that you can put on the web. It's how good your website looks, but it has nothing to do with the value that we have, that we got to enjoy back in those days where we shook a hand and explained to them the program. Call me if you have any situations, everything's guaranteed, whatever we tell them. But there's a relationship built when you do that compared to what happens on the internet today. And we went through after you started in the shows, then we went to catalog marketing, and we were mailing. I mean, I think 1 year I mailed 1 million pieces of mail,
right.
which is expensive, but the same metric.
Right.
How much did I spend on the mailer? How many people did I get back?
That's
and when am I going to get my money
That's
back
right.
and still provide a product?
Now you're doing it by our conversation.
Well,
your promotion
the
is
podcasting is a very important part of content, what they call content marketing. And what's interesting about this is this is the beauty of it, and this goes back to your entrepreneurial spirit. We're the only company that can do it. All the other companies that do this business don't have a person who's responsible for the wines.
Yeah.
You were responsible for the wines until 1989, 1990. I've been responsible for them ever since.
Right.
And if somebody wants to call me, a member or a future member, and say, why did you choose this?
Yeah.
Or what did you think of this? Or what was it? They can get an answer.
That's right.
You call wine.com, you call Wink, you can't get that answer.
No.
Because there's nobody. It's just a bureaucracy.
Right.
And I think it's a very important part of what we're trying to do is educate the customer and the client on wine and get them. Look, Dad, this thing's been like an hour and 10 minutes already.
Yeah. Let me tell you 2 quick stories.
Well, you got it. You kidding?
Number one, that first booth we got, the 20 by 20.
Yeah.
Within 24 hours, it was a gorgeous booth. You know why?
Why?
I went into our warehouse, and the wholesaler's warehouse, and took all the empty boxes they had of wines with the labels on them.
Oh, the fancy wines, yeah.
Charles Krug,
Yeah, right,
on and
yes.
on and on and on. Stack them up in this 20 by 20 place. When you walk down the aisle in that building and you ran into this 20 by 20 booth, it had a storeroom full of
It looked like it was full of wine.
boxes full of
But
wine.
man, that's a good point, though. 'Cause back then, they don't do it anymore, by the way.
Yeah.
They do it very little.
That's
They used to
right.
stick the label on the box.
Yeah.
So you would see the actual Charles Krug wine label on the box. They don't do that anymore.
No.
Because we have automated lines.
Or they had printed labels on the big
that's
boxes.
what I meant. They don't do that anymore.
And it looked just like a going business.
Yeah.
Really going business.
So you doubled your membership that first show.
Oh, it was
You went from
phenomenal.
like 2 to 400 to 40, 100 or
Yeah.
something.
And the interesting thing is, as people are walking by, they say, they're interested in wine.
Yeah.
They come over and talk. You shake their hand. You tell them a little bit.
Right.
There's no tasting, nothing like that going on.
No, you
Just a
can't.
bunch of
Right.
empty bottles laying there showing them what you picked last
That's
month or
right.
the month before.
There's a reason why they were empty, too, because I found that out. Because when we displayed full bottles, they were stolen.
Yeah, right. Well, and I want to make a second point. This is very critical. Paul spoke about buying the Wine of the Month Club for $1.
Oh, wait.
I've got to tell you why it was $1. Hold on a minute.
Yeah, all right.
Now, after
I'm in charge of the stop button, you know.
Paul comes over and starts doing what I'm doing in the business from the corporate company he was in. And we go to tastings together, So one day we go to a real fancy tasting in Beverly
Bordeaux.
Hills, at the top floor. We're a little late. It was only open for 25 people, put on by one of the major wholesalers.
Right.
And there were 2 seats left. They're already starting the lecture. Paul sits in the front, I sit in the back, and we had our little notebooks making notes of things. And so we listen to this boring lecture by the
Why we should like the wines.
yeah, and then we taste the wines, and there were some interesting ones. So we go downstairs. We're waiting for our car to be brought up from the parking lot, and I said, Paul, let's compare notes. So he pulls out his notebook, and I pull out my notebook. And believe it or not, of the 24 wines we tasted, we only varied in opinion on 2 of them.
Yeah.
I put my hand in my pocket, and I said, Paul, give me $1. He says, what for? I said, give me $1, and I handed him the keys. That's how he bought
That's
wine.
right. That's true. The symbolic
true?
story is true.
That's right.
That's true. And then I never saw you again. That's the problem.
That's right. You took the keys, man.
In fact, I remember my first selections that you let me buy on my own. You're in charge of the selections. It was a limited series, actually. And I bought Sanford Pinot Noir, and I bought Bella Oaks, Heights Bella Oaks Cabernet. 2 of the least risk-oriented wines you could ever buy. Everybody knows who they are. They're gorgeous wines. You can't fail by buying these 2 wines. And I relish in the idea that those days, those were iconic wines.
Yeah,
we were part of that.
They still are.
In fact, before you sign off, what I've had Ed Maciana do in our newsletter every month now. On the back, there's a flashback
I see
page.
that. Right.
And he goes through the 47 years of newsletters and cherry picks the iconic wines of the day today.
Yeah.
Wines that are beyond budget even.
Yeah.
Wines that you were selling for $6.49, which are now hundreds of dollars.
Yeah,
some of the Bordeaux that we featured back in the day. But there's something to be said that a lot of those wines, not necessarily directly attributed to the fact you featured them, but certainly had an impact on the visibility of the wine. Because one thing that the Wine of the Month Club does do for a wholesaler or an importer or a broker is, instead of somebody buying a wine like a restaurant and having to hand sell it off the menu or put it on the shelf at the wine shop at a liquor store and then tell people about it, we are putting the wines in the hands of the consumer that wants to enjoy them.
Right.
The people that raise the hand, the same people that walked up to, I guess the analogy is this, the people that walked up to the booth in the day of the shows, and now the people that are on the website who are searching for things on a Google search that land on our site, those are the people raising their hand, and those are the ones that we're trying, whose curiosity we're trying to solve by teaching them about wine. Right. So we're going to do this again. I know it's a long day, and we have to go to a fancy event, listen to my sister speak. So the judge is in the house, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, here comes the judge.
I'm in trouble. So, Dad, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. Hope we can do it soon.
Yes, I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was wonderful.
Then go take your nap.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalemkiarian. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. And of course, all these podcasts are sponsored by the original Wine of the Month Club, 48 years in business. Don't forget to visit our website, wineofthemonthclub.com. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.